What's going on, guys? It is Pete Nova from the Face Off Sports Network. Today, we're going to do a little overreaction video from last night's game, specifically talking about Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. So let's get into it. Isaiah Likely last night had 12 targets on 9 receptions for 111 yards and 1 touchdown. Could have had an extra catch and about tight end room and Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews as well, and kind of talk about what we should expect. How do we sort this out? So to kind of break down the statistics, like I said, Likely 12 targets, 9 receptions, 111 yards, 1 touchdown for 30 fantasy points. He also played 66% of the snaps. Now, Mark Andrews had 2 targets on 2 catches for 14 yards, 3.4 fantasy points, and was on the field for 74% of the snaps. Now, for those who watch the show, Mark Andrews was my tight end 3 on the year heading into the season. Isaiah Likely, I had somewhere in the early 20s. And I know some of the other guys on the show probably had similar rankings as well. But to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the situation, and should we be overreacting or is the reactions necessary? It's a little bit of a mixture of both. So last night, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely were on the field for 39 snaps together. Last season, the most plays in a single game that both players were on the field for was 16. Now, that is double the amount that we saw last year, a little bit more than double. And it is a little bit of a concern. Those stats come from Nathan Janke from Pro Football Focus. But another statistic to keep in mind as well, Mark Andrews was double covered on a higher percentage last night than he was ever covered in 2021 to 2023. So, the Chiefs did a really good job, and same with the Ravens doing the same with Kelsey. But both teams really bracketed the 2 starting tight ends and pretty much dared the opposing team to get the ball to other receivers, which we saw. Zay Flowers Likely on the Ravens side, and then Rashee Rice, had 10 targets, I believe, on the game. So when we talk about this game and we talk about overreacting and what we should do, going forward with both of these players, keep in mind, this is an offensive line unit that was young. It was banged up. I believe they lost one of their tackles in the middle of the game, and so they were already a little bit young on the offensive line on the right side, and it only got worse as the game went on. Chris Jones and that defensive line with Karlaftis, they really wreaked havoc on the edges, and the Ravens' game plan clearly was to just get the ball out quick and early, which really benefited a guy like Isaiah Likely and Flowers, who they kind of just, Lamar's ADOT was like under 1 yard in the first half, I believe. And so, it really benefited Likely because, his quick twitch and his ability to get open faster than a guy like Mark Andrews, led to more targets and just getting the ball out faster to him. And they needed to kind of help. They needed Andrews to help more with the blocking. Likely did block, but a lot of it was blocking and then releasing quickly into the flat for receptions. And then, the Chiefs were double covering Andrews down the field or across the middle. And there was just a lot of dump offs available for Likely in this game. I don't expect this to stay the norm. If I had to guess, this is probably going to be the best game for Likely this season. And so I don't want to completely overreact, but what I would say is, next week, this team squares off against the Las Vegas Raiders. Things to keep in mind about that game. The Raiders allowed the 16th most receiving yards to tight ends last season, so pretty middle of the pack. They were tied for the lowest amount of touchdowns surrendered to tight ends, and they were also 19th in fantasy points allowed to tight ends last season. So I don't expect either of these guys to blow up because, this Raiders defense is pretty underrated. But it's really about the game script, I think, which is most important. This this Ravens team wasn't able to lean on the run with Derrick Henry because they were playing from behind. I believe with a lead, it should help guys like Andrews, in the game script, and of course Derrick Henry. This is a good pass rush too. They have a really good interior D line. They obviously have Max Crosby. So I do worry a little bit about the offensive line and if it will hold up and if they're going to have to, keep Likely and Mark Andrews in to block, similar to what we saw this week, because this is actually a better defensive line and could be a better defensive unit overall, talent wise, surprisingly, than the Chiefs this season. Chiefs lost L'Jarius Sneed. They do have the better play caller from a defensive coordinator standpoint, but this could be a pretty decent matchup in terms of toughness for the Ravens and for Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. Now, I do think people need to keep in mind Mark Andrews did miss practice. He was in a car accident last week or 2 weeks ago. And so, he might not be playing at 100%. And the team just, the game script just didn't go his way. Now, Mark Andrews coming into the year was my tight end 3 or 4. I'd have to check my rankings. I did tweak them a little bit before game time. And then Likely, like I said, was in the earlier, early 20s. But look, I don't want to overreact, but I'm also not going to underreact too. Likely came out and did more than I expected him. And, those who were in on him this year, props to you. And then, Andrews just didn't get it done like I expected. And if Likely's going to be involved, I don't think he's going to be involved as heavily. But if he is going to be involved much more than he was last year, that's going to probably drop Andrews in my rankings. I think he's probably going to be more around that George Kittle-esque where, he's got some big boom games and he probably settles in as like tight end, maybe even 7 on the year, or Likely is kind of borderline touching that tight end 14 range is probably where I expect him to settle in if the usage is going to drop for Likely. We know that. But it's not going to be as low as it was last year and what I projected him coming into the season. So don't want to overreact. Do not go out there and trade Mark Andrews. Don't panic sell him. He's going to be fine this season. But if you are a tight end needy team, it is worth a shot going and trading for Isaiah Likely. I wouldn't trade the house expecting him to be a top 5 tight end this year. But it's somebody who's in some leagues, he's probably on waivers. So he's definitely worth an add on waivers. Don't go crazy either. But if you're in a deeper league, it's worth putting a decent amount, maybe 10% of your FAB in like a 14-man or even a 12-man, just in deeper formats if you really need the help at the tight end position. So let's not overreact, but at the same time, let's also be open to adjusting because, it's week 1 and, a lot changes from week 1 to halfway through the year, but we also have to take the information in and still address it as well. So that's going to be it for me, guys. Again, start Mark Andrews next week. Don't be afraid to put him in your lineups. You drafted him for a reason. You kind of have to start him unless you have a guy like Kyle Pitts or one of these other top tight ends and somehow you ended up with both. Then that's a different conversation. But don't completely overreact to and panic sell. We're going to continue to bring more news and notes. We have our Start Sit show tonight. So if you need to have some questions answered, don't forget to jump in, and I'll see you guys later.